This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. John Marshall set off on a 6-month volunteering adventure with his wife and teenage son and daughter in 2010. Their travels brought them to a wildlife sanctuary in Costa Rica, woofing in New Zealand, teaching English in rural Thailand, and working at an orphanage in India. His book about their journey is titled Wide Open World: How Volunteering Around the Globe Changed One Family's Lives Forever. You can learn more about John and his latest project at johnmarshall.com and neworphanage.org. John Marshall, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Paul, it's great to be here.
So this was not your first time going on an adventure, this 2010 adventure. You had previously lived in Portugal for a year. How did that whole thing come about?
Yeah, that was a kind of a reaction to a couple of tragedies that we had in our lives. My wife's father died of stomach cancer very suddenly, unexpectedly. And 2 weeks after that happened, my best friend was murdered just walking down the street. Someone stepped out and shot him. So when those two things happened, we were really not only heartbroken and crushed, but we realized that life is very unpredictable. And we just thought, my wife had always wanted to live in a foreign country. And when I'd always resisted it, and when she broached it, even suggested the idea, we just said, I was right on board instantaneously. I said, yeah, we needed time to heal. So we really picked 10 countries at random. One of them happened to be Portugal. We researched it. We didn't know anyone in Portugal, but we researched a little bit about, to weed down the field. And Portugal was the last one on the list. So we said, let's go. We packed up our 7 and 5-year-old kids. We sold our house. And we went to Portugal without really knowing where we were going. We ended up just driving into a little Portuguese fishing village. And my son at 7 years old stepped out of the car and said, this is it. And so we stayed there for a year. It was great.
For the 2010 adventure now, how long were you thinking about this before you made it happen?
Really, we talked about taking a trip around the world ever since my wife and I met. So at that point, it was something like 20 years. But it's never the right time to take a trip like this. Your kids are the wrong age, or you don't have enough money, or you're working on your career, or there's 100 reasons it's too dangerous out there in the world. There's lots of reasons why you don't take a trip like this. And when it got to the point where our son was coming up on his junior year in high school, we thought, man, if we don't take this trip now, right now, it's never going to happen. And right then I was on another trip with my wife, and I just had this sudden flash of insight in my mind. It was just 3 words. And those 3 words were year of service. And as soon as I had those words in my head, I knew exactly what it meant. It was almost like the answer to this question of how do we take this trip? Because we could never afford it. But if we did it as a service trip, if we volunteered our way around the world, working with nonprofits and doing good work with people who are also trying to help out there in the world, it might not cost all that much, which actually proved to be the case. And so by the time we made the decision to go and pulled the trigger, we pulled this thing together. We had some false starts, but once we actually were all on board, we had it all together in just a couple months. It's kind of crazy how fast it all came together. But once we decided, we just got it going.
What was the difference between your kids now are a decade older? So you have like a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old versus a 5 and 7-year-old. How difficult was that this time to get them to go or to convince them that this was a good idea?
As soon as I mentioned the year of service idea to my wife, she was right on board. And our son, who was the older one, who he's an adventurer, and he kind of was quickly in line with that idea. But our daughter was going to be a freshman in high school, and she was a little trickier just to get her. She kept saying things like, a freshman year is kind of a big deal, and wasn't sure. Her friends were maybe a little bit more a part of her, her life. But she came around and she started using phrases like, if we go, and I'm not saying I'm in, but if I'm in. And once she started talking like that, I knew okay, we're almost there. We just got to get her over that last little hurdle. And then, it was a totally different experience. The first time around, they were just kids. Our daughter was in kindergarten. So they'd do whatever we said. And this time around, they were little adults, so they had their own experience on the trip. So, they definitely had two totally different experiences out there in the world at two different ages, which is kind of cool to offer them.
So, John, you have all of these possibilities of where you can go. How did you decide the places that you were going to go to?
To me, that was really the fun part, because really you can volunteer anywhere in the world. I even at one point typed in Antarctica because I was convinced, what would you do in Antarctica? And I found a volunteer opportunity to come and live and work for free in Antarctica. It said, you must love the cold and penguins, but there was an opportunity to do something there. So it really boiled down to sitting with a family and seeing who wants to go where. And we all threw out ideas. So my wife was a longtime yoga practitioner, so she wanted to go to India. And I'd always wanted to go to New Zealand. And I think my son wanted to go to Costa Rica. And, we just kind of put things down, made a list, and then we started doing research on the internet. And the technique I use is really basic. There's organizations that can set these up for you. There's places you can go on the web where they can set up your whole itinerary. But I just typed the word volunteer and then say Costa Rica, volunteer Costa Rica, and looked at what came up on the Google search and then contacted them. So we had a very small budget. Our budget was $1,000 a month for all four of us to live and eat in a foreign country. And that works out to about $8 a day per person. So we had to find places that could accommodate that. And if they couldn't, and I couldn't convince them that we were worth their accepting that fee, we'd just move on and find another place. And so some places were free, some places are not free. You just have to look around a little bit.
One of the things that you did was you got a travel agent. Was that worth it for you?
I'd never worked with a travel agent before. And as I understand it, with a travel agent, they don't take a fee. They get their fee from the airline, and you don't pay a fee for this travel agent. So I thought, well, there'll be plenty of times where we'll be on the road and maybe the internet won't be accessible or I won't have time. I can also get kind of obsessive about finding the best deal. So I thought, I'm going to turn this over to someone else. And in the end of the day, I think that was a good idea. I think that there were times where I needed a ticket fast to get from one country to another, and I just sent an email out and she would pull it together in short order. So for us, it worked. I mean, maybe some people want more control of it than that, but I don't think it ended up costing any extra money, and maybe it even saved money. It's hard to know because I didn't research those tickets.
You brought a netbook with you. I'm just curious, did you have the internet access that you needed when you needed it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. You can find internet pretty much anywhere in the world. We were in the middle of the rainforest in Costa Rica with no roads in or out. There's no electricity unless the generator is running. And still, they had Wi-Fi out there where they would turn the generator on, had to have that running. But when it was on, we could hook up. I don't think there was anywhere we found where we could not get connected to the web. So it's definitely a worldwide web at this point.
You mentioned that one of your criteria for deciding where to go was the cost, but what other factors did you weigh in when you were deciding what organization to choose to volunteer your time to?
Well, some of the things that we thought about were, are we interested in that sort of thing? I really wanted another spot we were in the north of India up with a Buddhist monk in the Himalayas, and then we had one more stop before we were going to come home, and I really wanted to go to Africa. Couldn't find anything that was even remotely reasonable in terms of cost. So I typed in, I asked my travel agent where was the best place to stop between there and home where we might be able to just take a little layover for a while. And, they were saying Turkey or maybe Egypt. But the only things we could find there were things like soil erosion testing. And I thought, after all the fun we've had, that sounds boring. So we didn't want to do that. So really it came down to what sounds interesting. So our kids wanted to work with animals. So we found a animal sanctuary in the rainforest that dealt almost exclusively with monkeys. And I was interested in orphan children. An Indian orphanage was a natural sort of fit. It was basically, what are you interested in? And then there is something like that almost everywhere you want to go. So just gotta look.
Your first stay was at the Oso Wildlife Sanctuary in Costa Rica. What did you enjoy most about that, John?
Well, that's a really unique place. This is started by a woman named Carol Crew. This is the only place that I know of in the world that's raising orphaned or injured monkeys outside of cages. So when you go to this place, you live in a cage. And literally, I mean, you have bars on the windows, the monkeys are on the outside, and every time you step outside, you're just part of the monkey troop. So to be connected to monkeys, wild, these are monkeys that ultimately are going to go back into the wild when they get full grown, is amazing. It's an amazing experience to have them on you and to look in their eyes and to be a part of their lives. The only problem is I was told by Carol that they tend to dislike large white men. And that's a pretty good description of me. So I had my run-ins with one monkey there, a monkey named Sweetie, who I just kept getting bitten. And after my ninth bite, after we were planning for 30-day stay, after it was about 25 days, I finally said, I can't do this anymore. So we packed up and left a little bit early, but it was still amazing. And that place it's incredibly safe, and tourists come through there year after year with no incidents. But I was living in their space. I was in their territory. So they get jealous and protective, and I got the teeth.
Yeah, that was, after I read that chapter or those chapters, I was like, you know what? That's a place I don't think I would go because I just don't want to be bitten. I was bitten when I was young by a dog, and I know the experience that you describe in the book, and I don't want to go through that again.
Oh man, I was bitten by dogs too. So I had that same fear, that sort of irrational fear that I had of dogs growing up. But that fear just like there were times where Sweetie is running at me from across the field and I have to reconnect with her. This was to say after a bite. And I have to come out or I'm just going to stay hiding in a cage. But she's charging at me. And oh, my blood is pumping. I'm sweating. And she leaps up on my head and just greets me. And, there's no trouble. But yeah, it was pretty hairy, literally and figuratively. It was, but I wouldn't trade it. I mean, it was really a remarkable time. It just was enough at that point for me.
Next, you get into woofing. What is woofing?
Yeah, WWOOF stands for Willing Workers on Organic Farms. And that's an international movement that allows people like you and me to come to organic farms that register on a website and live and eat for free in exchange for a certain number of hours of work per day. So it varies between 3 and 5. Some people like you to work hard. Some people seem like they don't care if you work at all. So that was New Zealand, and that was a really inexpensive way to see what's, a pretty expensive country. The greatest thing about woofing for me was that my kids actually worked. And at home, it's hard to get them to work. If I'm raking the yard and I ask them to help me, they might ask within 5 minutes or 10 minutes, hey, how much longer do we have to do this? But there, 3-5 hours into a day's job, they're still working. They might not love it, but they're still doing it. And really, nothing made me more proud on this trip than watching my kids work willingly. I loved it. I really loved to watch them work beside me. Then we had a lot of fun too. It's really not that much work, and then we had the rest of the day to do what we wanted to do.
What part of New Zealand were you at?
We started in the North Island. We were in the Auckland area, and then we went a little bit further north. We did 4 woofing jobs for a week each. And then we flew to the south, and we were in a place called Kaikoura, which is on the east coast of the South Island. And then we went all the way up to the tippity top of the South Island. And, it's just an incredible country. It's like the supermodel of countries. No matter where you put your camera, you get this amazing picture. But it was also just a great experience, I think, for the kids to kind of step up. They didn't work super hard in the wildlife sanctuary, and they got scolded for it by the owners. And I think it kind of shook them up, and they thought, okay, we're out here. We're not just vacationing. We're actually volunteering. And so it was after that first stop in Costa Rica that they really stepped up their game and worked hard in New Zealand. I was super proud of them. It was really great to see.
Of course, I'd heard of woofing before, but I never really researched it much. And this cleared up some misperceptions that I had about it, which was I only thought it was in Australia, and I thought the age limit was 30, and once you're over 30, no more woofing. So it's interesting to know that this is over many, many countries around the world, and you could be almost any age.
And, you can woof right here in the United States. There's all kinds of opportunities just about in every state of the union. We found that, in fact, we were in our 40s when we went, but a lot of the woofing people that ran the farms, they loved having adults there, like having 40-year-olds, because we actually worked and did what we said we were going to do. A lot of times they see a lot of teenagers or, late teens or early 20s gap year kids, and really these guys sometimes want to just party and hang out and do as little as possible. And we saw quite a bit of that on our travels. And, that's one of the recommendations I give to people is, if you're going to woof, if you're going to bother, like woof hard, do it for the time you're needed. And if you do, the people are so appreciative. We found that we had all kinds of special treatments, including people gave us their cars. People gave us whole days off with maps and lunches and directions on where to go and do fun things. And so I think being older was good because most of the farm owners were older. So we made lots of friends as well. So there's lots of opportunities for really every age out there.
Next stop is Thailand, where you worked for an organization called Voluntee. What is Voluntee?
And Voluntee is an organization founded by a guy named Michael Anderson here in the United States. The idea is to bring native English speakers to areas of Thailand that don't get a lot of tourists. So you don't have to be an English teacher to do this job. You just have to be flexible and have a good sense of humor and keep a positive attitude and don't drink. And they have some very simple rules that pretty much anyone could follow. Then you contact the organization and they'll set you up with a teaching job in rural Thailand. So we went with our 2 teen kids and my wife and I, and my kids ended up teaching their own classes at ages 14 and 17. They taught their own classes to kids from grades 1 through 12, 3 classes a day, 5 days a week. And for a young kid to do something like that was super empowering, I thought. And we'd sit together at the end of the day and talk about lesson plans and what worked and what didn't work. And we had zero experience. We didn't even get the 1 day of training they were supposed to give you. So we showed up just cold as cold can be. But the kids knew a little bit of English and we figured out what we were doing. And I guess the idea is that we're better than nothing. So we speak the language properly. Our accent is correct. We'll spend a lot of time with the kids interacting. And then we would go into the classrooms. And I took English classes, so we would teach what we could teach. It was just a great opportunity to go in to a culture and really immerse yourself in a culture. Because as a teacher in a community, the people just loved that we were there. And we got to know, we were teaching all of their children in this tiny town. So everywhere we'd go in town, people were like, teacher, teacher, and would welcome us in. And we really felt quickly a part of the community. So that was really an amazing experience.
One of the things that I never thought of it before, you touched upon it, and I want to read this quote in your book. Simply by being in the village, we were a rolling English lesson all day long. So it's not just that time in the classroom with that group of kids, it expands beyond that to the entire village. I hadn't thought of it that way before.
Right. And people, the person who was the English teacher in the school that we were at spoke terrible English, but she had the best English in the village. So when we were there, we'd finish our school time and then we'd walk through the community or go in the surrounding countryside or do whatever we could do to explore. And we'd meet people all day long. And they'd want to work on their English with us, and we would talk with them. Yeah, so really we were not only the rolling English lesson, but we were also, sort of ambassadors for the language out there, just meeting people and talking and sitting and having tea and making friends. So it was a way that the kind of job went far beyond the classroom. It kind of lasted all day.
What part of Thailand were you at?
We were right in the dead center. Most people go up to Chiang Mai, which is in the north, or Phuket, which is in the south, but there's a big middle part. And if you go right to the middle of the middle part, that's kind of where we were. There's really nothing around there. We didn't see any tourists traveling through this area. which is why we went there. That was the idea of Voluntee.
What is a day in the life like as a teacher? What's sort of your routine?
Yeah, you'd get up. We were in a homestay. They'd, our homestay mother would have made us breakfast. We'd walk to school. You have to dress up. You have to wear nice pants and a collared shirt. And, the kind of rule of thumb in Thailand is the nicer you look, the more respect you get. So you dress up a little bit. And then we'd go into school. Once you got there in the morning, you'd have 3 classes over the course of the day. So once your classes were done, you were free to go for the day. But sometimes you'd have free periods in the middle and you just talk to the kids outside in the courtyard or something. And then once your day was done, we had about a quarter-mile walk back to our homestay. We'd walk back and have the rest of the day to do whatever we wanted. But it was 3 classes a day, 5 days a week. So a pretty cushy schedule, really not that tough.
What was the homestay like?
It was nice. It takes some getting used to from a Western point of view. The shower is just a tub of water that's sitting in the bathroom. So you come in with a bucket, scoop it up. As soon as you break that water in the morning, there's 100 mosquitoes that fly off the surface of the water. So you have to brush them aside first. And then you douse yourself with water. And then you bathe. The water just runs out through a hole in the floor. But otherwise, we had fans and we had screens on our windows to keep the bugs out. And the beds were comfortable and the food was fantastic. It was pretty plush. It wasn't like roughing it, sleeping on a bamboo mat or something like that.
There was some times where you took the motorbike into like some markets or whatever. I'm just kind of curious about how crowded are the roads with traffic and how dangerous is it to take the motorbike out, that sort of thing.
Yeah, not at all. In this part, if you were in one of the big cities, Bangkok or something, it would be like taking your life in your hands. If you're in Nong Kha, which is where we were, there's no really anybody on the road. It's like the rural countryside. So to ride the moped, the family moped, this was part of the homestay, into the village to get the family dinner for $2, which is what I like to do, and then practice my terrible Thai that I'd picked up. It's just like riding on a country road. There's really nobody around. Although I did have one night I was coming back and feeling like top of the world. I'd spoken in Thai. I bought my dinner. I'm driving down the road and feeling like, wow, it's sunset and I'm out in Thailand on my moped, free in the world. And all of a sudden a mosquito or big bug hits me in the head. And I was like, oh, wow, and then another one hits me in the head. And then another and another. And they had these swarms of bugs that come through. And I was just like squinting and closing my face down as small as I could make it because I'm just riding through this horrific swarm of bugs that's just packing into my face. So, it's just countryside, rural stuff.
Yeah, there's nothing like taking a June bug to the face. That's
or 100. It was like ridiculous. I was just laughing while I was trying to not to, take my eyes out, but it was something.
What was the most challenging part of the Voluntee experience?
Well, as not being teachers, there were days where classes seemed to last forever because whatever lesson we were trying to teach or whatever we were trying to do just wasn't working. It was also really incredibly hot. One day it was 50 degrees Celsius, which is 122 degrees Fahrenheit. And 122 is the kind of temperature that you really don't want to move. Your body just feels like it's cooking. And so we would walk that quarter mile home at the end of the day like tortoises moving in one direction. So between the heat and just the challenge of something new like that, teaching a class, that was probably the most difficult.
Okay, let's transition into the Good Shepherd Agricultural Mission. I found the story behind this quite fascinating. What can you tell us about how this was founded and how it was revived?
The Good Shepherd Agricultural Mission was founded the year after Indian independence. So it's one of the very oldest recognized nonprofits in India by the independently governing Indian government. I think it has a number, which is very, very low. It's like 16 or something like that. It was started by an American minister named Maxton Strong, who he wanted to teach people how to work the land and also bring them the message of Christianity. When he first got to this place, though, the Indian government gave him a couple hundred acres of land on an indefinite lease. There was nothing there. There were no roads in. He actually drove a tractor 1,500 kilometers across India to get there. And they had to clear the land. First, they had to drain it, and they had to start cutting trees down. There was absolutely nothing. There wasn't houses there. There was nothing there. There were tigers on the property. I mean, elephants and snakes and all kinds of things. But bit by bit, they kind of claimed this land, and they built this mission, and they started developing it. Well, over time, Maxton got old. He had lots of helpers who were there helping him. A couple of his children died. His only remaining daughter left, got married, and left the country. And he was there with just his staff. And when he died, the staff kind of began to mismanage the operation and take the money for themselves and not taking care of the kids, not feeding them properly. And at this point, the current people that are running the mission came back in the scene. So this is the Shipway family. This is Maxton Strong's daughter. Maxine came back with her husband and son. And when they saw what had happened to the mission that they had known when they were quite a bit younger, they'd been away for, I think, 17 years, they just were heartbroken. And they made a bold decision to come back and take it back. And they came with baseball bats and stormed the office and basically said, we're taking over. And the bad guys were vanquished. And so here's these people. I mean, Clifton, who's the deputy director still now, he was only 18 years old at the time. They now have responsibility for 100 orphan children and a mission to run and a farm and all of these things. So they've been there for 12 years, and they've just completely, revitalized the place. I just instantly fell in love with these kids. I've always had a big heart for kids, just personally. And I was told when I got there by Clifton, when we first arrived on our trip, that just to love the kids. That's our job. Just love the kids. We don't have to do much. And that was really easy to do because these kids were so loving and so filled with joy. It was surprising. You think of orphans as really just a sad, mass of regrettable humanity. But these guys were not like that at all. They were just really filled with some inner spark of happiness and kind of welcome for all of us. And I'd say of all the places we visit, that was our favorite place.
You refer to it in the book as the farm. What was a day on the farm like for you?
The day starts with a bell, and they call you to breakfast. And when you step outside at the farm, you step out of your door. They call me Uncle John at the mission. When you step outside, someone will scream, "Uncle John!" And these kids will just run. Unlike Sweetie at the OSA, who ran, and my heart starts pounding with fear. The kids run and want to hug you and want to just welcome you to the day and hold your hand. And it's really an amazing way to start the day. But we would do all kinds of different things, whatever kind of floated your boat at the place you can get involved with. So the kids might help out in the kitchen, or they might help make the bread, or they might work in the laundry, or you might work out in the field with the older boys who are working in the farm. They still harvest 75 acres of crops. So it just depends what you want to do. My wife loves little babies, so she worked in the nursery, mostly holding kids and feeding kids and changing them. And, it kind of depends on what you're into.
What did you find to be the most challenging part of life on the farm?
The farm has a special place in my heart because after we came back from that trip and I wrote that book, I actually went back to the farm and have since spent a lot of time there. I've been back. I'm actually planning another trip back just in a couple of weeks, but I actually lived there. I was planning to do a volunteer trip around India and just write a follow-up book, but I ended up going to the mission and staying there for the full 6 months. So I've really just fallen in love. To answer your question, some of the hardest things are, it's also hot, and there are mosquitoes, and there's very intermittent power. So if you're laying in your bed at night and the power goes off, so you have no fan over your bed, it's so hot, like it might be 90 degrees in your room, so it's hard to sleep. It can be tough, just physically hard to get there. It can be physically hard just to survive it there. But for me, the kids more than make up for that discomfort because they really give way more to me than I give to them. They really they really kind of fill me right up.
You end up a little bit later on, further north in India. There's a guy you talk about in the book named Ken Rinpoche. Who is Ken Rinpoche?
I first met him back in Maine one night. He was doing a talk at a local school, and he's just, you see him, he looks a bit like the Dalai Lama. He's in the same Tibetan Buddhist lineage. He wears the same maroon robe and with little gold accents, and he's bald and in his 70s, and he's a monk. So I just was so taken with him. He's one of these people that is just filled with a kind of just a peace. And I've known him now for years, and I've never seen him upset. I've never seen him angry with anyone. He tends to treat everyone like you would treat your best friend or a really revered friend. So he's a really amazing person. I got involved with his organization years ago, helping them shoot a video for their organization. And when we were traveling around the world, we wanted to go up and see. He has a school that he runs up in the Himalayas, right on the Tibetan border. And so we went up and stayed with him a little bit. He's a remarkable guy. And to have my children get to spend time with him, he really loves kids, but he loves my kids. And that was just great. They just soak it up. And everyone does who meets him and sees him. They just soak up the affection that he has for everyone. So he's really a remarkable guy.
You got a chance to see the Dalai Lama speak. Tell me about that experience and also your experience traveling to get there.
Well, as it happened, I just had wondered, maybe there'd be a chance we could see the Dalai Lama. He spends some of his summer sometimes in Ladakh, which is this area up near Tibet. So I sent a note to Ken Rinpoche and said, hey, any chance the Dalai Lama is going to be around? And he said, yeah, as a matter of fact, during the time that we were going to be there, he was going to be talking just over the mountains in the next border town. So he was going to be going and asked if we wanted to go with him. So of course we did. But to get there, you have to go over what's the highest motorable road in the world. It's like 18,300 feet or something like this. And so the road, there's no guardrails on a road like this. It's only open 3 months out of the year. It's such high elevation that the snow usually keeps it covered. But there's constant rock slides. And as you drive along this road, you look over the railing, or there's no railing, but you look over the edge, and there's burned out cars down there. Sure enough, like these cars flipped and burned, and probably everybody died. So here we are, driving along this very same road with big oil tankers coming at us and, all kinds of things. Like, it was really a hairy experience. But ultimately, we made it down into the Nubra Valley, which is on the other side of the mountains, and got to go and see the Dalai Lama speak. Now, unlike America, if you showed up to hear, say, President Obama speak, they wouldn't have a special section reserved at the front for foreigners. But they do in India. So we were escorted right to the very front, and there's a little row of folding chairs for visitors, and we were sitting within, close proximation. In fact, we even went one day where there were no seats, and were allowed to actually go up on the stage and sit on the stage with the Dalai Lama, which was crazy. I can't imagine, a guy, just because he's from India, being allowed onto the stage with the president to sit there. And the Dalai Lama is so much more revered than the president. He is considered a reincarnation of, basically, of God. He's the spiritual leader of all of Tibetan Buddhism. So it was really an honor and a remarkable experience to see him walk out and feel the love of the 10,000 people in attendance just pouring up on that stage, and to be so close and see Ken Rinpoche sitting right beside him. And we really kind of realized that he was a much bigger deal than we actually knew, because he was sort of a right-hand guy to the Dalai Lama. So that was pretty cool.
Well, John, I really enjoyed reading the book. It was a great, you did a great job. It's well written. It's very engaging to read. It's well edited. If you're listening and you want to know what it's like for a family to volunteer around the world, you should go and get this book and read it, because there's so many things that happened in it that we didn't even talk about.
Yeah, no, and it is. One thing I always stress for people out there who are thinking maybe about doing something like this. Most of the people I talk to, if they have a bucket list, even in their minds, it includes things like trip around the world. And one thing I can say is that if our little family can do this, anybody can do it. Because really, we didn't have any special connections, or this wasn't a book deal before we left home. We didn't have any contacts or any real experience other than that first trip to Portugal that you mentioned. We just decided to go and to actually make it happen. And that seems to be the one big hurdle to get over, is to make your commitment, actually decide you're going to go and do it. And once you fully commit, then the rest is sort of just the details to work out.
How did this trip impact the lives of your children?
It's funny. When we got back, my son Logan went to his senior year, and then he had to apply for colleges, and he wrote his essay about taking the trip around the world. And I'm convinced that's what got him into college in the first place. But after a year at Tulane, he just decided he didn't want to be in college because he wanted to get out on the road. So maybe in that regard, it wrecked him a little bit. But he went to South America, and he volunteered his way around South America for a year. And then he came back for one more semester and left again and went back to learn Spanish to become fluent, and lived in South America again for another 6 months. So he's taken I think it inspired him to take an alternative approach and to see life in some different sort of ways than the standard cookie cutter routine that most everyone repeats. My daughter was inspired to want to study medicine, to work for places in developing worlds. That was her initial idea. I don't know if it's changed over time. It's been a few years since we took this trip, but she's now be a senior next year in college, and she's still studying and moving forward. So I think, if nothing else, it's nice to grow up and feel a bit like a citizen of the world, and not just a citizen of the United States, and see everything through one lens. If you can get out in the world and you can be exposed to the world and to the people of the world and to different ideas and different religions and different ways of doing things, I just think as a young person, it's a great foundation upon which to sort of launch your life. So if that alone, they've got that in there somewhere, and I just got to assume it's going to be good for them in the long run.
One of the last quotes in your book is, "You will not change the world, but the world will definitely change you." How has the world changed you, John?
When I got back from this trip, I was lucky. My boss, who I had to quit my job before I left, even though I was initially offered a leave of absence, I actually had to quit to go. But I was given my job back, which was great, and even a better job. So it all worked out wonderfully. But, when you go out into the world and see the need of the world, it's really difficult to get it out of your head and live as if it's not there and it's not out there. And I really just could not shake it out of my mind. After my daughter left home and I took this trip and went over to India again, and I ended up at the orphanage, what's happened is I've spent most of my creative energy for the last 3 years working for orphan projects around the world. I've formed a new nonprofit called New Orphanage, which is dedicated to finding and supporting sort of best orphan champions around the world. What I discovered was there's a lot of people that maybe they're not so trustworthy, or the money isn't best used. And so I look for people that are good stewards of money, and then help to magnify their efforts out there to sort of vet them and find some trustworthy places for people to get involved. There's certainly plenty of need in the orphan crisis in the world. So I look to get as many people involved as possible. I use my experience as a TV producer and writer to tell stories of different things that are happening in that way. So it really began with this trip and seeing a bit of the need out there in the world, and having, I talk with people all the time who are really passionate about all kinds of things. They want to save the rainforest. They want to save the rhinos. They're worried about hunger and bringing clean water. But sometimes these people have never been to the rainforest, or they've never seen an animal in the wild. And I just think if you meet the world, it's really easy to fall in love with it if you actually meet it. And so a trip like this is a way to really get inspired in a real way, because you actually get to meet and see with your own eyes and have your heart touched by those experiences. So for me, I can say my whole life was changed and continues to be changed in a really wonderful way. I really feel like I found the focus and sort of passion of my life, even though I love the other work that I do as well. This is sort of the thing that gets me most excited and that gives me the most fulfillment.
John, what's next for you?
Well, I'm writing a new book about life at an Indian orphanage. I am working on all kinds of different projects related to orphans around the world. At the Good Shepherd Agricultural Mission, where we have a whole college or school campus that we're building out one building at a time. We're on building number 3 right now. Anyone can see more if they're interested in the Good Shepherd Agricultural Mission. You can find it just the way I found it, which was if you type Indian orphanage into Google, this is the first place that comes up. That's actually their web address, indianorphanage.com. So you can see some of the work that's being done. I'm heading over there actually a week from this Saturday to throw something we call summer games for the mission kids. This is like summer camp mixed with Hogwarts. And it's really a crazy 30-day summer camp for the orphan kids. So this is the 3rd year we'll be hosting it and throwing it. And so I'm looking forward to going back and helping to be the ringleader of Summer Games 3 at the Indian Orphanage.
How can people contact you if they want to learn more?
Well, you can go to my website. It's johnmarshall.com, and you can check out some of the things going on and click contact. They could also go to my nonprofit, which is neworphanage.org, and do the same thing. I'm always looking for people or projects. If people know of great organizations that work with orphan children out there in the world, I'd love to hear about it. We're always looking for positive stories, but also fantastic people who are great orphan champions out there in the world. If people want to get involved in different things, there's always room for people to get involved. These kids certainly need everyone. There's enough need in the world where we could all get involved and make a difference. So yeah, just reach out. I'd love to hear from anyone out there who either has a passion for orphan kids or just wants to learn a bit more.
Check out the book, Wide Open World, How Volunteering Around the Globe Changed One Family's Lives Forever. John Marshall, thanks for coming on the show.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Recorded May 19th, 2016. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.